Hey YouTube, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Melissa, and this channel is all about psychiatric drug withdrawal, reactions, and recovery. And it draws on my 7 years of experience in this community, as well as my own 4.5 year journey to recovery, and the probably thousands of conversations I've had at this point, both formally as a coach and informally just in my years in the community. And the purpose of this channel is to provide hope in what often feels like a hopeless situation, and to just talk about themes and topics that come up regularly in my conversations with people that have to do with this entire experience. So none of it is meant to constitute as medical advice. It's just drawing on these experiences. So the topic for this video is navigating or being in marriages or relationships when you're going through this experience. And I want to say before I get into this topic that I am coaching again. So I offer 30-minute calls and 60-minute calls. And you can find the information for my direct booking link in the description of this video. So I haven't pre-planned this video at all. I'm just going to speak exactly like I speak when I'm talking to people, just exactly what I'm thinking in the moment. And so I have never been married, but I was in a long-term relationship, which resulted in a child during this experience. And I was having a conversation earlier this week with someone about how when you're in a relationship or a marriage or something long-term where you've known the person for a long time, it can be especially difficult when you met the person or you were with the person for an extended period of time in one state, and then now you're in this other state and you feel not like yourself, not like the person you normally are, and your partner maybe has expressed the same thing. So I'm going to be speaking mostly from my own experience here, and hopefully you can relate if you're in something similar. So there used to be a Facebook group called Marriages Destroyed by Antidepressants. I don't know if it still exists, but I was a longtime lurker, maybe even a poster in that group. I can't quite remember, but it was mostly for the partners, from what I can remember, the partners of the person in withdrawal. It wasn't actually for the person in withdrawal, but I was in it anyway. And it was very interesting, to say the least, to see people's perspectives and perceptions of this experience from the partner's point of view. And like I said, I haven't been married before, but I was in a long-term live-in relationship when this happened to me. And my relationship went through incredible turmoil because of this experience, but I'll explain exactly what happened. So I met this person in 2015 when I was still stable on my dose of citalopram. I had been on citalopram at that point for 4 years, but going from 2015 and segueing into 2016, I was noticing, especially now in hindsight, things that were happening to me that hadn't been my experience up to that point on antidepressants. And I still can't say for sure whether they were strictly due to the drug or due to life circumstances or both. But 2016 was actually one of the happiest years of my life. I was 34 years old. I was in this relationship starting at the end of 2015. It was someone that I was just like head over heels for right off the bat. And 2016 was really when we were in the most fun part of the relationship. You know, we were just getting to know each other, and it was fun and exciting and falling in love and all of that stuff. And then I went into this experience in 2018. However, prior to that, in 2017, the end of 2017, my relationship was starting to rip a little at the seams. And it was causing me a lot of stress, but I've always been someone who is a great suppressor. Whether that's due to my upbringing or my personality or both, I've just always been someone who tends to put the needs of others ahead of my own. I tend to be a people pleaser. I tend to be someone who is just give, 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 give. And my relationship was falling apart, and I was desperate to keep it together because I had, at that point, uprooted my life from where I was for years and had a stable job, and I moved to his city. And for a while I was on my own, and then I was living with him. And at the point in 2017 where things were starting to unravel, I was desperate to keep them together. But the situation was becoming more and more toxic. But at the time, I was, again, such a suppressor and in denial a lot of the time that I didn't realize. And in hindsight, I was like, oh my goodness, I should have ended the relationship then and there, but I didn't. And then in 2018, I went into this experience. So my relationship was not perfect by any means at that point. It definitely wasn't where it was in 2016. And I'd mentioned earlier in this video that in 2015, 2016, I was noticing things happening. And in hindsight, I think it was poop out, but it also, I guess it really wasn't life induced, just because my life at that point was seemingly perfect. You know, I had this wonderful relationship, a great job. I had a great place to live, great landlords, a great car. I was in a pretty decent standing financially. Like, I had lots of friends. I was doing pretty well. You know, my health was decent. And so that's why it was very confusing to me at the time why I was starting to get these sort of breakthrough symptoms. I started to have a little bit of S thoughts every once in a while, and like just a random day where I would just be full of anxiety. And I was like, where did that come from? And I would wake up in the night every once in a while with a nocturnal panic attack, which I had never experienced before, only during the day. So I'm like, there were things kind of showing up then about my fourth, fifth year on the drug, but my life was still great. 2017, my relationship was starting to unravel, but I was in denial. 2018, I went into full-blown withdrawal, didn't recognize it as such. And then everything in my relationship just continued to get worse and worse and worse, because now we had this added stress of whatever I was going through. And I did not understand or have any clue that I was in withdrawal until the very end. I think it was New Year's Eve, 2018, that I really figured it out. You know, I kind of had at certain points throughout that year, I was like, is this what's happening to me? And I think I had come across maybe one Facebook group at that point that I thought maybe I'm in citalopram withdrawal, but then for some reason I dismissed it, or I don't even remember exactly what happened, but I really didn't fully put all the pieces together until 2018, at the end of 2018. And at that point, like 2018 was one of the worst years of my life. So I'm in this withdrawal experience, not really fully understanding it or recognizing it. Thought maybe, but then I was like, nah, I was in a very bad spot financially. That was when, from 2016 to 2018, my financial situation also fell apart. And that was why I went off citalopram, because I was just like, I can't be literally paying for anything but shelter, food, and like the very necessities. And I didn't think it was a necessity anymore. I thought I was okay, even though I was having these odd breakthrough symptoms every once in a while, but they were not derailing me by any stretch of the imagination. So yeah, 2018, I am in this bad relationship. I'm in withdrawal. And I'm just like lashing out all the time. I'm having all of these anxiety problems, all of this, sleep problems and brain zaps. That was, I think, what clued me into, oh, maybe this does have to do with the antidepressant. But I didn't realize, I didn't know it was like withdrawal, if that makes sense. Like, I didn't understand it at all. And yeah, it was just and up to my eyeballs in debt. And it was just bad. Like everything, I didn't have friends. I was then at that point, even prior to April, when I went into withdrawal, was in April when I quit the citalopram. I was working like 4 jobs because I was in such bad debt. And it was just, the whole thing was a disaster. And my partner was trying to understand this. So I did a very brief reinstatement in November of 2018. He saw how bad that was. And he's like, do not take any of those drugs again. He's always been very anti everything. And I just didn't understand it for the longest time. But then when this happened to me, obviously I understood it more, his stance. And so he was like, I don't want you taking any of those ever again. And so he was trying to be there for me, and he was calling it withdrawal once, I put it all together, and he was trying to be understanding, but it was wearing on him. So we continued through the relationship through all of 2018. And if you know my story, I was still functioning, even though I was in withdrawal. I was working like 4 jobs at one point in 2018. So things were very, very stressful. And the relationship continued into 2019, and he was starting to get tired. There was one point when I was in my room and he was out in the living room, and I overheard him talking to his dad. And I was about a year into it at this point, withdrawal, maybe a little bit more than a year. And he was like, oh, it's just the same old, you know what? I'm just so sick of it. And I think he was starting to consider whether or not I was mentally ill at that point. And he was trying, and he would send me texts throughout the day like, I can see when you're doing a little bit better, and that's the old you. But then when you go into, these, I didn't even call them waves at that point because I didn't understand it then. And I didn't really have windows and waves, but again, if you know my story, I had a really long window and then I went back into it, and he's like, I can see the old you and the real you when it comes through, but then when it's so difficult, it's getting so difficult for me, when you're so bad. And I was just like, well, how do you think I feel? And I was working too much. I mean, the whole thing, just holistically, my life was such a mess. And finally, everything came to a head in August, September of 2019. And then that was when I moved home. And I think, okay, so here's when people talk to me about navigating relationships, there's a few things that I say, and I wish I would have known more about at the time that I was in it. It would have benefited me a lot to talk to a coach back in those days, but I didn't even know about them except for one. And I didn't even know he coached. I just watched his YouTube videos. But so I tell people, this is why that I say it's really ideal to have multiple levels of support, because I use the analogy of placing one single, like a balloon, on a pin or on a nail, and it'll pop. It comes down and it pops. But if you put it on a bed of nails, then it's gonna just sit there. It's kind of that same thing. So when you just have like one person, it can be very hard for both of you because that person gets worn down. They don't know how to help you or what to say. And you feel like a burden, but also this incredible pressure to get better because you're like, my partner is sick of me. I'm sick of me. I'm going to get abandoned. And especially if you have any prior, like me, abandonment issues, I mean, it gets so much more exaggerated in withdrawal. And so it just causes this immense amount of stress in the whole situation. It's just like when any member of the family or a child in the family gets a chronic illness, it affects the entire family. I mean, when I got diabetes at 16, I had the highest blood sugar on record. I was nearly dead. When they figured it out, I was in the hospital for multiple weeks, and it just uprooted like my entire, not uprooted, but it just upended, is that the right word? My whole family. Like it really affected everybody for quite a long time after that, while we learned the ropes of becoming a pancreas, essentially. And it's the same thing here, where it really does affect the entire family. And a lot of people are talking to me about the effects it's having on their kids. And it's really a stressful situation for everybody. So again, coming back to the multiple levels of support, it really is ideal if you can, you have the closeness of that partner physically. But then when things are really bad, or that person's really worn out, or say they're taking care of the kids and the house for a lot of the time because you're just really struggling to function, then if you have other types of support, especially and specifically within this community that are positive, you can then just go and kind of pour out all of what you're feeling and experiencing to them. And I know there can be problems with that too. Like if it's just one other person, it can be difficult because you can get triggered by them, or you can feel bad if you're really bad and they're doing better. You're worried about triggering them. And that's why, again, if you can have some type of group. So I know there's coaches that offer group sessions. For me, it was like an informal group that I had formed through my old YouTube channel, just organically. And, because then you can take sort of the pressure off yourself, where you need help and you need support, but you're tired of putting that on your partner and they're exhausted. So then you can go and talk to this other source of support, like ideally a group or a small group, or even just like 2 or 3 other people. And then so you have the physical closeness of the partner, but you have the ability to just dump everything, all of what you're experiencing to your support group, because they are also understanding what you're going through and can completely commiserate and relate to what you're saying. Whereas the partner is trying to understand, but they really don't get it. And then if you can, the third ideal sort of level of support is if you can have the mentorship or encouragement of a coach or someone who has recovered that you can talk to. That's kind of the ideal situation, because this does really put a strain on everybody. Like it puts a strain on the children. It puts a strain on the person experiencing it and the partner for all of the reasons that I just outlined, because this often, not only are the symptoms so difficult and, you're not really functioning, if at all, but also it's putting such a strain on you, like financially a lot of the time. And just in other ways, it's affecting your social life and your work. I mean, there's so many layers to this. So that can be tough, and it can be, I don't know, I want to say good to have boundaries, even though that can be really hard, where it's like you almost have designated, I want to say, time where you can sit with your partner and just share how you're feeling. And then, it's sort of like finite. And then anything beyond that, you can go to your support group for, because you want to share what you're experiencing with your partner. I mean, that's like your life partner, but it's almost helpful if there's like a limit on it and you can have another place to sort of fall, if that makes sense. And like I said, when I was in that Facebook group, it was very interesting because I was quite inexperienced at that time, but just to read the experience of the other person. And it was helpful for me to understand what my partner at the time was going through. I wish I would have encouraged him, or he would have been in that group. It would have been really helpful, but he just wasn't really a sharer, and I don't know how much he would have gotten out of it. But just me reading firsthand the experience of the partner was helpful, because I was just trying to understand, because he was like, this is so hard on me too. Like, you don't like, I know that you're suffering and struggling and I can see that, but it's so hard on me too. And I remember when I got diabetes, my parents would say that and they would make me mad, but I can understand it now that I have my own child, and just in reflection, they were always saying, well, this is so hard on us too. And I'm like, well, why? You're not the one that's always having to poke their finger and give yourself needles and do all these things. But I can see it now. Like, any type of chronic thing really does affect like the whole family unit. So I definitely want to say that I empathize with you, sympathize with you if you are really struggling to navigate your relationship through this, because it does cause a lot of strain. And because there are so many parts to this, it really can encompass a lot of your home life. So let me know your thoughts on this in the comments on how you've navigated this aspect. If you're in a partnership, a live-in partnership, marriage, whatever it might be. And I think too, and it can be so hard to, like, if you're someone who prior to this was extremely social and, you loved going out and doing things and you were very active and very involved, and your partner also enjoyed doing those things with you, and now you can't or you won't do those things for the time being, that can also cause strain. So how do you find that balance between pushing yourself to go anyway, even though you don't feel like yourself, or just being like, I just can't go. So we either both need to cancel or you need to go on your own. That's really tough, because a lot of times through this, and I've mentioned this in other videos, it is so subjective and so invisible. So a lot of times you're masking, like you're pretending to be okay when you really aren't. And that is, you're trying to do it for your partner, even though you're struggling. And then it can bring out a lot of additional emotions like anger and rage. And I'm just so sick of this. And I can't believe this happened to me. And I mean, it can bring out a lot. And then, your partner is experiencing that with you. And it can take a lot of planning and trying to navigate that, and a lot of communication. And I've shared in other videos about, I think the importance of extending yourself when you can, but also pulling back when you need to, and being very open with your partner about that. And also, like, if you do decide, okay, now I'm starting to feel a little bit better, so I'm going to try and attend this thing, and putting parameters around it, like, and explaining that potentially to the host, if you know them well, to your partner, and say, okay, I'm willing to go for half an hour, but then we need to leave, and then kind of stretching it. But this happens over time. Like, this is an unfolding. And another thing that I wanted to mention too is that I feel like I hesitate to say these things because I know people can get upset and angry, but I think it's important for encouragement as well. A lot of the things that I don't even like using the word learn, because it's not like you had any control over this, but one of the things that can come of this or be a fruit of this is the coping skills that you learn. So communication, potentially like assertiveness, boundaries, all of those things, and even gratitude for when you start to reintegrate and you actually become immersed in an experience again and start to enjoy it as healing goes on, you can become so much more grateful for experiences that you once took for granted. And like I said, a lot of the things that you're kind of forced into doing now can really serve you well when you get well. Because at least for me, I was always someone who had weak boundaries. I had trouble saying no. I had a hard time standing up for myself. And this experience kind of, in a lot of ways, forced me because I was in so much pain. It was like I had to learn to do some of these things that now continue to serve me and that I build on. So I wanted to say that too. And I know that that can be a touchy thing to say because people who are really in the midst of suffering or who are protracted are like, yeah, but that's not happening for me. Um, but it definitely can happen. And certainly that's been my experience and quite a number of people that I've talked to who've recovered or at the tail end of recovery. So, and this looks slightly different for different people, but I wanted to just add that in there. So let me know your thoughts on this topic. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.